Okay, according to the Bahamas National Statistical Institute's 2017 Labor Force Survey, the average annual income for a Bahamian household is $39,048. Indeed, 55% of households are at or below this income level. To further provide context, distressed properties were researched due to limited availability of data on new construction, revealing that a 3-bedroom, 2-bath dwelling of around 1,000 square feet averaged $155,000 in 2024. Additionally, the government of the Bahamas states that as long as home ownership costs are 30% or lower than the gross income of the household, the house is affordable. Therefore, a household earning $40,000 may be able to secure a 30-year mortgage of around $170,000, okay? Making the distressed property attainable. But there's also the matter of supply. How many new build or pre-owned housing units are available at this price point or lower? Do we have data on the demand for housing supply? Now, this is a very, very broad topic, but for our discussion today, we want to consider how to mitigate these challenges and ensure that truly affordable housing is widely accessible to the average Bahamian and to all Bahamians. This is what we hope to uncover during today's panel discussion entitled Developing Sustainable Solutions for Affordable Housing. I am Sonia Brown, a registered professional engineer, principal of Graphite Engineering Limited, and your moderator. Joining me today is Charlene Smith, principal of Sharon Wilson & Co. Charlene is a distinguished legal expert in real property and commercial law with a career marked by landmark contributions to clarifying property rights in the Bahamas. I am also pleased to welcome Nick Dean, registered professional engineer, principal and director of risk management and resiliency at Integrated Building Services. Nick is a leading expert in resilient, sustainable design whose expertise has shaped iconic projects throughout the Bahamas. Charlene and Nick, thank you for taking the time. Okay, for joining us today. Thank you. So let me begin by posing a question to both of you. In my overview, I shared the reality of affordable housing, but let's take a step back. With climate change as a backdrop, why should we as a society care about ensuring affordable housing for all? Charlene.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonia, for your very kind introduction, and thank you to the organizers for having me back. It is a pleasure to be here. Affordable housing is linked to larger development goals, and so whether or not you yourself are in the market for an affordable home, it is important to everyone who resides in or cares about the Bahamas. Firstly, affordable housing provides stability and security for individuals and families. Secondly, affordable housing fosters social cohesion. It increases the level of trust and solidarity and the degree to which people in our society are able to cooperate, live together, work together, and importantly, share a sense of belonging and identity. Social cohesion is really essential if we're going to have a stable society, and affordable housing undergirds social cohesion. It's also important for economic growth. If housing is affordable, then individuals and families have more disposable income to spend on other things and to support other businesses. In addition, of course, housing spurs construction and allied professions, and so that spurs economic development. But overall, and perhaps why we should all care and why it is so important, is this: affordable housing is a basic human right. It has been identified as such by the United Nations. There is a sustainable goal set by the United Nations, and the Bahamas has agreed to it. And so the goal is that it calls for countries to ensure access for all to adequate, safe, and affordable housing and basic services, and to upgrade slums by 2030. And so, as I said at the beginning, whether or not you yourself are in the market for an affordable home, the Bahamas having affordable housing is important to all who live in or care about the Bahamas.
Thank you, Charlene. So Nick, from your perspective, what do you think? Why should we care?
First of all, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for hanging in with us. The few, the brave, right? So, very powerful question there, Sonia. And I think even though the answer is not a short one or a simple one, or one we have time to explore in full depth this afternoon, to make a short answer short, I think a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So first of all, to give it some context, the matter of the affordable housing shortage is not just a shortage, it's actually a crisis, and it's a global crisis at this stage. So it's a phenomenon that's not just unique to the Bahamas, it's actually across the world. And Habitat for Humanity has, of course, done many studies, and they've shown that for parents who are unable to afford stable, healthy housing, their levels of psychological stress is higher. For the adolescents in their homes, the level of academic performance in schools is lower. And for children who are transient and moving frequently, they've exhibited a lot of emotional and behavioral issues. And on the flip side of that, persons who have access to affordable, healthy, stable housing have cited greater feelings of stability, safety, independence, and they have, of course, income to do other things with. So, in short, if one block is stronger, the entire house is stronger.
A very engineering answer. Okay, yes, but I like that concept of the strong and the weak link. It's very important that we take care of those persons who are most challenged in our community. So, Charlene, so thank you for those thoughtful responses. We see that the implications are far-reaching. Now let's talk about mitigation strategies. Prime Minister Davis, in his recent national address, said that while the government is building more homes and piloting a rent-to-own program, it is not reaching enough people. He wants to explore ways to incentivize the private sector to build more and expand concessions for first-time homeowners. He added that increasing the supply of housing is the best way to see reductions in the cost of housing. Charlene, how can we address issues related to land acquisition, zoning, and permitting that often complicate the development of affordable housing? From a regulatory perspective, would you suggest any specific policy changes or incentives to make affordable housing projects more attractive to developers?
Wow, thank
That's
you.
a lot.
That is a lot. Excellent question. I'm going to break it down into two. The first question, I think the first part relates to land administration or land acquisition, and then the second part more planning and zoning issues. So I'm going to share a statistic with you in terms of, and common, I would say, before I go on, something that both would have in common that I think would help developers is certainty. If we know when we're going to buy land for certain who owns the land, I think that would be helpful. If we know when we are considering buying land for development, what that land can be used for, I think that would also be helpful. So basically, if we just bring a greater level of certainty to it. And so I'm going to share a statistic that was shared by a local real estate firm who does a quarterly report of the real estate market in the Bahamas. And they found that for a property to close in the third quarter of 2024, on average, took 105 days. That is an improvement from the year before when it took 158 days. So this is just to acquire the land. And this is from the time that you already have an agreement. So you've already identified the land. That's a lot of time. And the time is really because of the uncertainty around land titles in the Bahamas. And so the government has already said that in this year we should expect the introduction of land registration. And I think that will do a lot to remove the uncertainty in connection with land titles in the Bahamas. And that would help developers quite a bit. Because when you think if you're a developer and you're waiting 4 to 6 months just to acquire the land, that's a long time. And cliche but true, time is money. So that all adds to the overall cost and makes housing a little less affordable. Secondly, in terms of planning and zoning, if we knew this 5 acres has been set aside and the purpose for which it has been set aside, that would also lend certainty to the entire process and allow developers to approach their decision making from just a different view. It makes it, in my view, it would help save time being money, and we would also, in zoning, know our needs and zone accordingly.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're going to pick up a little bit more about land later, but let me just bring Nick back in here. When we speak about affordable housing, we must also prioritize sustainability. That's ensuring the needs of future generations are not sacrificed because of current developments. So Nick, given your experience with risk management and resiliency, how can we ensure that the Prime Minister's goal to increase affordable housing projects is not only financially viable, but also resilient, considering the Bahamas' specific environmental challenges? Secondly, what materials, building practices, and best practices are most effective for creating affordable housing that is energy efficient and climate resistant? That's a tall order.
That's a very tall order. So that's a very layered and complex question. There are 1,000 ways to answer it. So I'm going to give you a very engineering answer again. First of all, let me say that I think the initiative to increase the volume of affordable housing and to try to find ways to make those houses more affordable is a giant step in the right direction, and I applaud the administration for doing that. But I think we need to look at some of the root causes of why we're in this crisis today. So first of all, let's understand the notion of affordability. So Sonia gave the example of the distressed properties, and I think at around 155,000.
It was about 155, yeah.
And that the average Bahamian would be able to qualify for a $170,000 mortgage.
Yeah, that's at a 40,000 household.
So, in addition to being an engineer and project manager and working for others over the past 30 years or so, I've also been a small property developer myself for the past 20 years. So I really started developing properties in around 2003, 2004, and I just did my last project mid last year. So we don't have a lot of statistical information available, but I do have a lot of my own personal experience in watching the cost of construction change and just anecdotal information just from speaking to other contractors. So for the example of that 1,000 square foot home, if that was a new build, so back when I started, I would have been able to build that for about, when I was building for myself, about $100 a square foot. So if you added the cost of land, say at about $80,000, that would have been about $180,000 for that building. Nowadays, I've seen that go from me building at $100 a square foot to now at about $180 per square foot. So that same home is going to cost $260,000. So if the average person can afford $170,000, there's where we get the inability to afford that home. So how it got there, there are many reasons that we probably don't have the time to get into now. But I think, like I said, I applaud the notion of building more. But if you look at what you gain from increasing the volume, you're going to get some economies of scale. You're going to be able to buy in bulk. You're going to have a greater ability to negotiate prices of materials with vendors. But that only takes you so far. Vendors are only going to drop their prices by so much because at the end of the day, they got to make a profit too. So we need to take a really fundamental look at how to change this, and it needs a paradigm shift and a change in how we view the whole notion of affordable housing. So the average Bahamian, when we think about homes and we think about our housing, we're thinking of building property, and Bahamians like plenty land. We want land all around our house. I think we need to kind of step outside of what we're used to and explore different options. The two main ones that I would like to consider this evening is, first of all, the idea of a single detached home versus the idea of multi-residential and attached housing. Because with attached housing, and we travel all the time, we stay in condos, we stay in townhomes, we're getting more adjusted to that type of living. You get to reduce your cost per square foot. I'm going to have a shared wall. I'm going to have less foundation. I'm going to have less roofing. I'm going to have less yard to maintain. So my cost to build is going to decrease. I'm going to have fewer windows, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing to consider is the size of the average home. So we were talking about a 1,000-square-foot home, and which is considered small here. Yeah. So typically people are looking at 1,200, 1,500, 2,000 square feet. Even in the affordable housing section, people are looking at a 1,500 to 2,000 square foot home, which is actually large. So if you look globally, even in developed nations, their actual building footprint for homes is much lower on average. So in the UK, for instance, the average home is about 818 square feet, and in Hong Kong it's 456. So the whole notion of having that big home with big yard is something that we need to wrap our heads around. So automatically, if you reduce the square footage of a home by 20+%, you're going to reduce the cost of that home. So none of these things in and of themselves is the entire solution, but a combination of those pushes that cost of building down. And if we have a comprehensive discussion on the costs of affordable housing, we can't just talk about building, we have to talk about the cost of home ownership. Because you're going to build this house, and then you're going to be in it for the next 20, 40 years. So the low-lying fruit there is building by creative design, high roofs, insulated roofs, reduce the amount of cooling needed, reduce your energy costs. In addition to that, buy energy-efficient appliances, buy LED light bulbs, put timers on water heaters. So the low-lying fruit is trying to reduce your ongoing cost of housing overall as well.
Right, so thanks for mentioning those sustainability elements there, because that helps with the ongoing operating costs.
Exactly.
But before I go back to Charlene, I just want to, and don't get carried away, Nick, because I know you're structural, but we need to talk about climate resilience, because I know of the unfortunate thing about persons who are able to afford affordable housing is it ends up perhaps in an area where it's prone to flooding, and so they end up in this rinse repeat cycle where there's a storm or hurricane event, and then they get damaged, they have to spend, so the home isn't affordable because you're
Right.
trying to fix it all the time. So
Exactly.
just spend a few moments next, restrain yourself. How do we fix that?
Well, it's not a quick fix, but I think we need to look at what the actual problem is. So in terms of resiliency, we want to primarily to consider resiliency to impacts from changes in climate. And to be honest, we have a pretty robust building code when it comes to structures as it is. Even the upgrade in the building code is going to fortify that more. So to be honest, in terms of resilience to one of the things that comes to mind first is impact to hurricane. If a building is built in strict accordance with our building code, that building 2 to 1 is going to fare pretty well in a hurricane event from wind damage. Now, what needs to be considered is proper siting of buildings to begin with. One thing that we don't have and we should have is floodplain mapping, especially in a country where we have high water table, average low land mass. Most of the land in this country is within, say, 5 feet of sea level. We need to have floodplain mapping. People need to know before they purchase a property, is my property susceptible to flooding? If so, should I even purchase this property and build here? Avoidance is your first course of action in building resiliency. So some places are not suitable for building, places such as very low-lying land, places such as with reclaimed land, and if you're talking affordable housing, you probably shouldn't be building near the coastline as well. Because I talked about the cost of ownership. In the course of 20, 30 years, if you have to repair your home every single time there's a major hurricane, you get hit with a $10,000 to $15,000, $20,000 repair effort. And at that level of the market, unfortunately, many people don't have housing insurance. I mean, cost of ownership gets extremely high.
Okay, great. All right, Charlene, over to you. Now, with the ongoing impact of foreign investment in our real estate market, how do you think, is that really impacting the cost of prices negatively, positively? And, what should our response be?
Well, I think even today, there are a few articles in a local newspaper with realtors speaking about the market absolutely booming at the very high end. And, multiple properties of over 20, 30, $40 million. And of course, that would have an impact on affordable housing because going back to social cohesion, we all must live together in this community. And keeping with the link, which I love, the weakest link, we need to be sure that the weakest link is still strong if we're going to enjoy the $20, $30, $40 million home that you've bought. And all of the social, I'm not speaking as a sociologist, but, we need our weakest link to still be strong. And the fact is that that end of the market is booming. Of course, that means, perhaps just under it is also booming, or at least the price goes up. And what that does, the entrance to home ownership may be a little higher as a result. But there's one other thing I wanted to mention, please, Sonia, in terms of affordable housing. Because, at that end, fine, you're probably okay, right? For those people who the United Nations is concerned about, when we're talking about, affordable housing, there's a study, the research was done in the early 2000s, primarily in New Providence. And we found out that to meet the demand based on the households being formed, we needed to build between 2000 and 2011 about 28,000 homes at the affordable level. We have not. That would be about 2,400 homes a year, and we have not done that. But what we do have, according to the research done around the same time, is nearly 14,000 dilapidated homes. So if those homes were not dilapidated, they could be in the inventory to help solve the problem. You're almost talking about half of what we found that we need could possibly exist. And so what causes that? Now, I haven't drilled down to all 1,400, right? But I do know, sorry?
You said the bank.
Oh, the bank? Perhaps. But, you know, I love this panel, by the way. I'm the one lawyer with 2 engineers, so I'm going to stick from the legal point of view and just suggest that sometimes it's a title issue. And I ask you to just consider, if you know of a home in your neighborhood or your parents' neighborhood that was really nice when Mr. and Mrs. Nancy Drew lived there, but then they died and the children, quote unquote, let it go. And I'm going to suggest that perhaps some estate planning issues were in play there, and that a lot of the dilapidated homes we see today are a result of a death, and then the steps that were taken or not taken thereafter. And so I think Nick Dean categorized it well. It's a crisis, and it's incumbent, in my view, upon each of us to ensure that we do not make that crisis worse. And the way we do that is, if you have a home or any other building, ensure that your estate, your affairs are left in such a way that it doesn't become 14,001 homes, the one being yours. So you see, it's an individual issue, but if many of us are doing it, it really becomes a national issue, removing possible inventory from the housing market and leading to all of these issues.
Thank you very much for that. Do we have time for any questions? Producer, wrap up. So thank you so much, Charlene. Thank you, Nick. I could talk about housing all day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.